rescued him. And you think that after you've been riddled with arrows, you would stop? He went out and told the Roman leadership they were wrong anyway, and they got rid of him a second time. So the saints are role models, and they serve as living examples, teaching tools, kind of like posters for primary school kids. You ever go to a primary school classroom? They may have a word or two, and then they have a picture there to reinforce the word. Icons are the same way, because they're not only the representation of the person, but many times there are things in the icon that gives us tips as to what they did and how they did it, and what the trial or tribulation they overcame. And for people with a limited reading ability, this is great. So it not only serves as a catechism or a historical record, but it also provides things. Now, when does things start to turn around for Christianity? Well, it starts with this guy behind me, Constantine. Constantine is the first Roman emperor to politically embrace Christianity. Now, some people say, oh, he was Christian. Yeah, he was, but it wasn't until his deathbed he accepted Christ. Now, we know his mother was Christian, Helen. He sent her on travels to the Holy Lands, looking for the relics of Jesus, and most importantly, the most important relic that she supposedly found was the cross. And there's a whole story that goes along with that. But just to give you an idea how organic Christianity is spreading, this is person to person moving out. By 325, this is the impact of Christianity. The area that roughly we know that our Christians are in. And Rome is diminishing. Remember, Rome at this time is 1 million people. It is a diverse cosmopolitan city that has all sorts of things going on with it. But now, Constantine says Rome is no longer good enough. It's insecure. He realizes that these Germanic tribes up here are building. He can't keep security, and he decides that he's going to move his capital to a new city he founds called Constantinople, which is right over here. And it's going to exploit the Silk Roads. Trade. Wealthy. It's at the right place, the right time. So now we're going to see from about 400 going to about 700, Rome is kind of on its own, floundering a little bit. There is no protections of the empire as active as it would be. So what we're going to see is the development in the early Christian church. And remember, we're not talking denominations now. So strike out this nonsense, Catholic, Orthodox, whatever. We're talking Christian church. There's one. Now, there are people in there that have different beliefs, which will have to be reconciled. And that was done through what we call ecumenical councils. But going forward, there is going to be, and this starts about, 500 AD, something called the Petarchy, which is the 5 principal seeds of Christianity, which are going to either have a patriarch or a pope. Pope is, of course, a fancy word for father figure in the Greek. Spiritual father, who are going to oversee churches in a region. Constantinople was probably the largest at the beginning and had the biggest authority because it was the church of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was the replacement for Rome. But notice, I'm sorry. touchy finger. Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, Alexandria. Those are the 5 principal cities. 5 principal cities of Christianity. 3 of which are going to be eventually subsumed to Islam. But early church, most of the Christian cities are in the east, setting the path. So because of distance and authority, it wasn't always easy to maintain control. And what we find is different faith practices emerge, different sorts of theologies, etc. And those have to be reconciled in 7 ecumenical councils that are called by the emperor of what we call now the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire. Bringing the main church leaders together to talk about doctrine. What is it to be a Christian? What are our core beliefs? How do we practice, etc.? The word orthodoxy comes from the word right way, the Greek word right way. In other words, doing it all the same. Not having variation. Although it's going to be very difficult. There were 7 conferences that were held from 300 to 700 to deal with it. Now, I'm going to turn my program, I've done enough talking. You don't want to hear from me. I'm not the good spiritual guy who has the insights. We have an authority here. Father John will walk us through the rest of this.
Thank you, Mr. George, on the presentation, and kind of to give me an intro into what I'm going to say here. As we see, George took us through a wide span of history. I'm kind of going to do the same thing as well, but to focus on a message. The message of Christ before Christ. We'll start with that. And you might ask, how is this possible? What are you talking about? You're talking about Christ before he came? Well, if you look at it, iconography in a way depicts that. If you look here on the left, now we have a picture. I'll ask a question. What do you think that icon on the left is showing there? I know it looks pretty bad, but you probably have heard of the story. There you go. You have that. And what do you think that prefigures? He's going to sacrifice his son, right? Put it together, right? What is it? We all know, Jesus Christ, right? It kind of points to that. In the middle here, you have all these men with the long beards. What is this? What is going on here? Well, it's basically Old Testament prophets that talked about Jesus Christ before he came. And on the right, let's see, I got the pointer here, right? Let's see how this, there we go. We have the Virgin Mary. What are all these people doing in the tree? Is it her family tree? No. These people here are prophets from the Old Testament that spoke about the Virgin Mary before she came. And I'm going to touch upon a few of the prophets, and the reason I'm going to do that because it ties in with our iconography presentation. It ties in with what we have here. For example, the prophet of Jonah. Now, I'm not going in any particular order. There's many prophets from the Old Testament. I'm just going to touch upon a few because it's pretty cool to see what they talked about before Christ. So, for example, here, prophet Jonah, who lived 800 years before Christ. And I won't go into the whole slide, but the main thing is here, he prefigured Jesus Christ and his resurrection. And we have here in the Gospel of Matthew, that kind of ties it back. As Jonah was in the whale's belly 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. This is Jesus Christ saying this, going back to the Old Testament. Again, we have Prophet Jonah here in the dome above us. Moving on. Again, no order here. I'm just kind of jumping from prophet to prophet. It's kind of bringing out the ones that speak the most about Jesus Christ. And actually, Isaiah is interesting because the early church, the fathers, as we say, the early church, the first people that kind of gave exegesis about the scriptures and kind of broke things down for the people, said that the prophet Isaiah, right here, spoke so much about Christ that it's almost that he was around when Christ Christ was around. It's almost that he knew him. Obviously, they had a 700-year difference, about give or take, from the time of Isaiah's prophecies to Jesus Christ. So we see some of the big ones here. Will be born of a virgin from the line of David. Gentiles will seek him. Will bear the sins of many for the sake of salvation. Be spat and struck upon, and will die a transgressor's death. Basically, and there's a lot more. This is not it. This is not limited to just this. But again, I'm bringing out a few of the prophecies that he said about Jesus Christ. And again, by looking at this, if you know a little about the scriptures, you kind of put the pieces together, right? And we move on here. Jeremiah, again, another one. He prophesies around 600 years before Christ. Foretold about the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ, the new covenant. Again, the new covenant that Jesus Christ made with the body and his blood, his body and blood. Daniel, again, is another one. Daniel, and he prophesied during the captivity in Babylon. We all heard a story about the three youths, and actually I put the picture here. The three youths. Again, this is not in the church, but this is from the catacombs, early 3rd century in Rome, where, again, it gave us a picture. Again, you have to remember, as Mr. George said, that people couldn't read at this time. The scriptures were not really available, and I'm going to talk about that a little more in some detail as we move on. But again, the pictures kind of depicted things that we're trying to convey, the message of God. So again, Sakallariou is another good one. He talked about the entry into Jerusalem that Jesus Christ had, his crucifixion, the scattering of the apostles. I have a few more in here, well, that are not here, but the betrayal of Jesus Christ, again, for the silver. So again, he was 500 years before Christ. Again, Zacharias is up here. He is right. I'm going to put a picture with a picture right there. Again, and we have about 16 prophets in there. There's more prophets in the Old Testament. We're not going to go into every single one. But I'm trying to portray here that they've got a message, right? They have a message that they're trying to talk to get out to the people. And what we know from the Old Testament that we've read, that not many people listen to the message, right? They try to warn the people didn't like it. Many times they persecuted the prophets and killed them. So the message is not really getting out, right? It's not really getting out. We saw in one of the slides that the Gentiles will be worshiping God. Well, how are they going to worship him if you're not really getting the message to them? We read from the Old Testament, the Gentiles and